everybody. I'm excited. I think everyone knows me, but for those maybe that don't, I'm Suze Allen. I'm the host of Memoir Church. Thank you all for coming. Shared stories, I think, always have been important to me. I'm the kind of person that would come to your house and not know your family and go look at your photo albums if they were out on a coffee table and be like, oh, now who's that? How are you related to them? And I just feel like when we tell people our stories, then they see us and we build this beautiful connective tissue. And we need it now more than ever. I know we've said that throughout time, but this is a very, very um, big time. And I think that more and more sharing our stories, our intimate stories, being able to tell people, you know what happened to me? You know who I am? You know how I evolved? You know how I wake up and get out of bed in the morning? This is how. And I think that's just such a beautiful thing for us to be able to do by being practicing. Instead of that, someone asks you, hi, how are you? I'm fine. And you? Okay. Chit chat, light, light, light. And then you don't really feel like you leave that conversation with some knowledge of who they were and some deeper connection. So I'm glad you're all here. And I really feel like next month, we're going to be doing something that I'm going to do every other month until these 4 years are over. What 4 years, you say? I think you know. But it's called Writer's Resistance. And it's all memoir stories or poetry on this America, living in this America. And we've done one, and we'll be doing it next month. And I'm really excited. I am beyond thrilled to introduce and to have with me in this Zoom room Sophronia Scott. Hi, Sophronia. How are you?
I am good. I'm so thrilled to be here.
Sophronia, what prompted you to write a collection of personal essays? You're primarily a novelist, is that true?
Yes. And when I went into the MFA program as a student, I was studying fiction. And when people started talking to me about creative nonfiction, well, Suze, I've been a journalist. I worked for Time and People magazine for like 15 years. What is creative nonfiction? That sounds like something I would have been fired for at my old job. So I didn't know what they were talking about. But this person had been in correspondence with me. He said, you should be writing these things down. You should be writing essays. And so I wrote an essay called White Shirts, which is in the collection. It's also available online. And when that essay was published, I thought, well, why would anybody care? This is just something about me. But when I saw the comments in that essay, I realized that people really weren't reading about me, that they were reading themselves in the essay. And I
Mm.
said, okay, then I'm on board for this. This is a conversation. This is connection. I will do this. So I turned my MFA into a dual MFA. So I did fiction and nonfiction, and the collection got started when I was a student.
What do you find about the creativity of telling your story? What feels, what's in your process that makes it come to life for you on the page?
Well, Suze, I think that it's the reflection and consideration that brings the experience to life. So if I were just saying this thing happened to me, that's reportage, right?
Right.
So um, there's nothing that someone can bring to that. If anything, that disturbs me when I read memoir that is only that here is
Mm.
this bad thing, because I feel like you put that trauma on other people and you haven't gotten yourself through it, and so they're stuck in it too.
Hmm.
So to me, it's about, what have you made of this story? Who are you because of it?
Mm.
And that is the thing, that journey that you take the reader on is a gift.
Our stories, our ordinary lives, how we live our lives and get through the day, get through,
Mhm.
make things happen. Um, what's your take on that as far as like how what you find exciting to read in memoir or what moves you.
Well, remember the essay essentially began with a guy named Montaigne in the 1500s writing about his bowel movements, right? He wrote about his everyday to the nth degree. Yes, he wrote about friendships, he wrote about his children, he wrote about work, but he also wrote about what's going on in his body, right?
Mm-hmm.
Totally the everyday. And we are fascinated by that. But again, there's a certain amount of reflection about that. He's not just talking about his body, he's reflecting on his physical existence in the world, right? Sometimes, Suze, I think when you can do that kind of reflection, you're helping people learn how to think,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't know, we these things are happening to us every single day, but we don't necessarily know how to process them, we don't know what to make of them, we don't know how to make the connection of, oh, because I'm feeling this, then I am going to be that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think memoir helps people to look at their own experience and say, oh my goodness, this is probably happening to me, this is why I'm feeling this way. and
Yeah.
and I think just looking at the everyday in a certain way, right,
Mm-hmm.
brings the reader new eyes.
Well, I want to quote the that your Love's Long Line was inspired by Annie Dillard's observation in Holy the Firm, that we all reel out love's long line alone, like a live wire loosed in space to longing and grief everlasting. And I just, that's exquisite. And what a way to be inspired.
Well, Suze, it was that's basically my way of saying I'm I'm writing my story. That
Hmm.
as much as I have hopes and dreams for how others will respond to me, I only have my love, right? And I can only know my love. And
Hmm.
so I will put it out there as much as I can, and knowing it may not come back to me, right? So I'm reeling it out to longing and grief everlasting.
Hmm.
So this is it. This is Love's Long Line.
Yeah, because it is that whole thing. If we don't live, we don't grieve, you know, but when we're living it and immersing ourselves in life, we have longing, we have yearning, we grieve, we experience struggle. And I think that it's just beautiful that you sat down and said, I have to write this, I have to capture it. Um, that's also that the immediacy of the muse and also of just life taking a hold and your love for your friend. That's so beautiful. Well, I can't wait to hear what you've brought today, and I will take myself out of the mix. And you just, I can't wait to hear you read. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Suze. So yes, I'm reading from Love's Long Line, and I explained to Suze this is something that I actually haven't read in public, even though I speak about it. These are going to be two pieces, um, both about my mother. The first piece I didn't expect to be writing about my mother, a piece that is unresolved. And then the second piece is the resolution piece written a few years after the fact.
Mm.
So this first piece, I'm starting my timer to make sure I stay on track. This first piece is called A Fur for Annie Pearl.
Mm.
The old woman's hips seemed to be spring loaded. I didn't know how else she was able to jump off her little house's porch and come at me so fast, her legs pumping in a speed walk that seemed to be her way of trying to remember how to run. My baby's come back. I knew she'd come. I just knew it. The eyes behind her bifocals radiated joy, and her arms, thrown open, soon clasped around my neck. These arms were thick but powerful, and it felt like someone had laid a boa constrictor over me. Her bristly chin scraped the skin of my bare shoulder. Confusion overwhelmed me. She laughed. I did not know this woman. I managed an uneasy smile, but within minutes, I was prepared to give her anything she asked for because of what she said next and because of what those words gave to me. When she released me, she spoke in short, excited sentences that were barely sentences, and she shook her index finger at me to accentuate each one. Your father, Vassy Scott, pulled up here in that car right after you were born. He came to me with you in his arms, like this." She clutched the floral print apron tied around the waist of her short sleeve pink polyester dress, rolled up the fabric, and tucked it into the crook of her left arm. He said, "Pearl, I've got something for you." And it was you. You were just the prettiest thing I'd ever seen. And I just kept hugging you and kissing you. He laughed and slapped her thigh. And your daddy says she pushed her vocal cords to a lower register in perfect imitation of the voice I recognized at once. "Pearl, give me my baby back here before you eat her up." I processed her words as quickly as I could, but my brain seemed slow, as though its hard drive had crashed and needed rebooting. This woman literally blew my mind. Daddy, his baby, me. I tried to conjure the image, a golden one because of its newness and surprise, me as an infant in my father's arms. I only have one picture of me as a baby. It is a small, wallet-sized photograph, black and white, taken by the hospital photographer just hours after I was born. In this image, I am a tiny head, eyes closed, with a big tuft of hair on top. The rest of me disappears into the white blanket swaddling my tiny being. I've never seen a picture of either of my parents holding me, the third of what would be 7 children, but the first girl. When I think about how this story, specifically its choreographing, must have come about, and it's even more amazing to me. My mother must have been holding me. This was 1966, the time before infant car seats, and she did not drive. So my father, for this story to play out the way I've been told, must have pulled up in front of the house and taken me from my mother's arms. He did it so he could present me with pride to his friend. I wondered what my brothers, aged 9 and 2, were doing in the car while this was happening. I know they must have been there. My father didn't believe in babysitters or in leaving children home alone until one of us reached the age of 12. Did my brothers have to sit through this scene more than once that day at various friends' houses? The thought fascinated me, and it still does. This stranger, Annie Pearl Charleston, had given me a tremendous gift, and she tossed it out so happily and easily, like a wealthy woman in a fairy tale flinging gold coins into the street. I fell to my knees gathering them, not realizing until that moment the depth of my emotional hunger. As Annie Pearl laughed and hugged me again, my mother got out of my rental car and stood looking very pleased. She had delivered the goods, though it had taken months of prodding to do it. She began her campaign not long after my father's death in 1991. She would call me at work and speak to me as if Lorain, Ohio were just around the corner from my office in Midtown Manhattan. "Annie Pearl says she wants to see you." "Mom, I don't know Annie Pearl." "Yes, you do. She lives over there on West 21st Street. When I was a child, my parents, I should say my father, because he spearheaded the excursions, took us visiting often. They would pile all 7 kids into the station wagon, and we would drive around Lorraine, sometimes to Elyria. Most of the people we visited were relatives. Both of my parents had siblings nearby, and my mother's father lived in Elyria. But we also called on friends, and I remember the names of all the non-relatives we saw regularly: Doll, Maddie, Miss Mary, Miss Regina, and her brother, Mr. Walt, Mr. and Mrs. Frisbee, Mr. Buster, real name Henry Williams, and Bertha May. After my father died, his many friends and relatives materialized out of the vapor of my childhood memory to pay their respects. Even if I'd never seen some of them before, I still knew who they were. Daddy was a talker who told stories endlessly, often telling the same ones repeatedly, so I would hear a name and be able to place them in the map of my father's life. He knew this person in St. Louis. That man worked with him at the steel mill. This woman used to be married to a brother long deceased. I had no memory of anyone named Annie Pearl. "Well, she had some falling out with your daddy," my mother said, in that halting way she had of speaking when she didn't remember the pertinent details. Or, and this was probably closer to the truth, she didn't understand what had happened at the time.
Mm.
Either way, this didn't strengthen her argument. If it had been my father doing the asking, well, there would have been no asking. I would have been sitting in our living room listening to him talk, as was my custom for visiting him ever since I left home for college. He would have commanded, as if it just in that moment he had made up his mind to do so. Let's go on up here and see Annie Pearl. Yes, sir. The point is, we would have gone, and I would have done so obediently. There was a time, though, when I would have gone with resentment in my heart because the truth is, I had a falling out with my daddy, too, although neither he nor my mother would have recognized it as such. My father was a commander, but when commanding failed, he hit us, my mother included. He would lash out with electric cords or dryer belts, sometimes even beating us out of bed in the middle of the night because we left dishes unwashed in the kitchen sink. I rarely think about or discuss this anymore because when I moved away and could view my family from a distance and become more exposed to the experience of others, I came to understand my father raised us in a way that he and many others of his age and culture brought up their offspring. I am one of a whole population of children who were sent into the woods to fetch the switches for their own weapons.
Oh my God.
But what remains in me and what I am constantly encountering years later are the emotional marks still left in me that need to be smoothed, nursed, comforted. When I came to forgive and understand my father, all I could do was visit him, sit and listen, knowing he would never throw his arms around me and say he loved me. That just wasn't who he was. So I began looking for the signs of love in his past and present actions. Like the time just before I went to college when he took me to a bike shop we regularly patronized and talked the owner into giving me a new bike at a significant discount, which he would pay over time because that child is going away to school and needs some way of getting around. That bike, a basic women's 3-speed, was stolen before my senior year. I remember being too tired to carry it up 4 flights of stairs where I was living that summer. I left it locked to a telephone pole near the front door, but the next morning I found the cable cut and my bike was gone. My roommates didn't understand why I cried so hard, why I was inconsolable. I still think of it when I see bikes cabled to telephone poles or parking meters, not because of the bike itself, but because it represented a tangible sign of my father's love. Whenever I would uncover these signs of love in my memories or in something he did, I would call him or travel to see him and deliver a silent thanks. It had to be silent because he did all the talking. But to hear him was another kind of gift. I could tell by his warm and lofty tones that he was glad to be in touch with me. I thought I found all the gifts, and after he died, there would be no more signs of love. But Annie Pearl offered me another, shiny, bright, and precious. I cherished the image of my father holding me in his arms. I would have been days old, full of fresh baby scent, probably only a little bigger than the apron bunched up in Annie Pearl's hands. That afternoon with Annie Pearl, I learned she had known my father even before he was married to my mother. She lived in the same rooming house as he did, near the steel mill. There was something exhilarating about the stories Annie Pearl told me. I felt alive, baptized, as though she poured water over my head and confirmed something I once thought I believed, but in reality only hoped to believe. My father loved me. And I could trust the story she told because she didn't paint a beatific portrait of him. She saw both sides of my father, his violence and his love, and could reconcile and accept both. My mother and I sat in Annie Pearl's house. It had that musty smell of a place lived in for decades. I, struck by Annie Pearl's youthful movement and energy, asked her age. I'm 78 years old. Can you believe that? She laughed as though she couldn't believe it herself. No, I don't believe that. At some point in the afternoon, she leaned toward me, almost conspiratorially. You live in New York City, right? Yes, ma'am, I do. Is there any way you can get me one of them furs the women there wear? I've always wanted me one. I see them on TV, women in New York City walking down the street in fur coats. I saw the television show The Jeffersons playing on a screen in my memory, and Louise Jefferson, as played by Isabel Sanford, coming through the door of her, as the theme song went, East Side apartment in the sky, removing her fur coat and handing it to Florence, the maid. Annie Pearl could have seen such other fur-clad females in soap operas or old Hollywood movies, just as I have, but the key words, women, New York, fur, coming from her brought up Louise Jefferson. And I, that quickly, made up the story for myself that she was the person Annie Pearl wanted to emulate. Wow, that's a great idea, I told her. Maybe I should get one too. I'll look into it. We enjoyed a good laugh and finished our visit. When we said our goodbyes, I promised to return. Then I drove my mother home. I didn't tell either woman how I had secreted Annie Pearl's request away with me. Already I knew I would get her a fur coat, even if I had to walk into Bergdorf's, put down my credit card, and pony up $1,000 I almost certainly did not have. I was delighted she asked me for something, happy to have such a hopeful mission. A few days later, I went back home to Manhattan with a sense of purpose and anticipation. I felt purpose because I truly wanted to thank her for the memories of my father she had given me. I felt anticipation because I knew how much she would love getting a package from me. I kept picturing the UPS man bringing the box up her porch steps and how much she would squeal when she opened it and realized what it was and whom it was from. It's that feeling of how much I wanted to say yes to Annie Pearl and how diligently I moved forward with that yes over the course of several months that I look back on now. I think about searching out that fur for Annie Pearl every time I put off something my mother had requested of me. Even now, there's an unfulfilled request. My mother asked for an enlargement of a family photo I've recently taken with my husband and son. The picture file is on the computer or on our family desk somewhere. I have yet to look for it or even ask my husband where it is. I've grown tired of her requesting. I've grown exhausted of the giving for holidays, as well as for everyday appeals like the photo. She likes to make sure she gets her presents, and when I call her on a holiday, she will run down the list of what gifts and money she's received. When she recites such bounty, I am loath to add to the pile of stuff. I started my search for Annie Pearl's fur at work. I wrote for People magazine, and it seemed to me as much as we reported on celebrities and their clothing, someone in the office would know how to buy a fur coat at a reasonable price. My inquiries paid off better than I expected. One of my colleagues told me the socialites of the Upper East Side often cast off their old furs to neighborhood thrift stores. I could probably find a nice one at a Goodwill for a couple $100s or less. The information provided such relief. I dreaded the thought of entering door upon door of Fifth Avenue or Madison Avenue shops and sneaking peeks at the price tags and having security guards eyeing me suspiciously. I could walk into a thrift store with no more bother than a Barnes & Noble. So began my process of locating such stores, calling them to ask if they had any fur coats in stock, and if they did, going there to examine the furs in person. When I write about my mother and my attitude toward fulfilling her requests or giving her gifts may make me seem cold, immature, or even ungrateful. I'm not afraid of those labels, but I want it known that I'm aware of them. And what comes next, I tell not by way of excuse or explanation. This is just how it is for me. And my writing about it is still my coming to understand why I feel this way and why I can't seem to hold for my mother the kind of forgiveness that I cultivated and still do for my father. I began thinking about this last spring when I attended a writer's retreat in Missouri, and I stood beside a river discussing flaws with a friend who was also participating in the retreat. He asked if I had any flaws. I quietly noted my mother had called and left a voicemail a few days earlier, and I had yet to respond. I didn't know what to say to him after that because the sentence sounded so common. Many adult children avoid their mother's messages. The whole concept is fodder for jokes in movies and television shows and has been for ages. But I know how unfunny my feelings are, how much anger and lack of compassion anchored my neglecting to call her back. I didn't see how I could explain it in the course of one conversation. It's even harder for some people who have met my mother to understand what I'm talking about. Most people find her so sweet and small. She was once 4 feet 11, but seems to be shrinking every year. And childlike. She will recite one of the many religious poems she's collected over the years. I begin my day with Jesus at the drop of a hat. But she does this well because she wants approval. She wants to please. And it is exactly this characteristic that upsets me.
Mm.
I soon discovered these socialites who gave away their furs were often tiny. Tom Wolfe's social x-rays from his novel Bonfire of the Vanities came to mind whenever I attempted to push my arms into coat sleeves that were too narrow. I'm not especially tall myself, just 5'5", but my shoulders are broad, my arms muscular. I tried the furs on myself because I figured Annie Pearl and I were about the same size, even if she had a bit more heft around the middle. If it could fit me with room to spare, she could wear it comfortably. Whenever I walked into a store and saw several coats, mink, fox, sable, my heart would get pumped up with hope. Certainly Annie Pearl's fur was among them, but then I'd get deflated, little by little, as each coat proved too small. When I was growing up, it often seemed as though my mother wasn't an adult, but an older child who had a bunch of younger ones placed in her care. My father confirmed this idea for us regularly and often told the story of how, when they were first married and lived with my mother's father, he came home from work to find the house dirty, and my mother, who was then in her late 20s, out jump roping in the street with some girls. But the memory that sticks with me most involves the time when our family was sitting in our tiny living room, and my siblings and I were eating candy and watching television. I don't remember where we got this candy, but I do remember what my father said. You give your mother some of that candy. You know she's like a child. She's sitting there and she wants some, but she's afraid to ask you for any. My siblings and I looked at each other. What Daddy said sounded so strange that it seemed like a joke. At least that's what I thought. Still, one of us jumped up and gave the candy to her. And I think that was the beginning of my mother not being afraid to ask for anything because she knew we would have to give it. But for me, the moment opened a window on what I already suspected. My mother was indeed a child masquerading as an adult. I considered the months, and the search did take months I spent looking for that fur coat, and I wonder if I was seeking Annie Pearl's approval, even as I sought the elusive piece of finery. I doubt this, because really, if I wanted to please Annie Pearl, all I needed to do was show up. And I did, visiting her on the same trips in which I saw my mother. Annie Pearl never mentioned the fur coat, never requested anything else of me. So I must admit, I was the one who had my heart set on the fur for reasons I'm slowly beginning to excavate. And I'm coming to see my mother inextricably linked here. I feel it when I'm in a Bath and Body Works store trying to remember what was the last gift set I bought for my mother there and wondering if she would even notice if I gave her the same thing twice. My mother's birthday is in January, less than 3 weeks after Christmas. I don't know why I still haven't developed the habit of getting her both gifts, Christmas and birthday, while doing my holiday shopping. Around New Year's, she begins her petition, reminding my siblings and I of her day coming up. She did this even after my father died the week before her birthday, but I was probably too crazed with grief to mind. In fact, I felt fine about sending her gifts, requested and not, in the first years after he died. I would send her the extra handbags I'd acquired after frequenting sample sales as a fashion editor. I mailed magazines, puzzle books, and ribbon candy, her favorite. I felt sorry for her living by herself. I remember taking her home one night after visiting Annie Pearl and watching her climb the steps to the stone slab that was our porch, and watching her unlock the door under the glow of the light my father had always set by a timer to come on at dusk. It made me sad to think of the empty house she entered. She looked so small and alone. I can't tell you when giving gifts to my mother lost all meaning. Perhaps it dawned on me one evening while watching A Charlie Brown Christmas and hearing with new ears the letter that Sally, Charlie Brown's little sister, wanted to send to Santa. After noting how long her list will be, she adds, "If it seems too complicated, make it easy on yourself. Just send money. How about 10s and 20s?" It made sense to me. I've since mailed many checks for my mother's birthday and Mother's Day and Christmas. The feeling was the same, like I was throwing all these presents and clothes and money into a voracious black hole. But any piece of jewelry, stationery set, or bottles of lotion seemed to please her. As long as I sent something, I would be off the hook until the next occasion when once again I'd buy a new item and toss it into the void.
Oh,
In 2002, my sister Thea left Michigan after earning her master's degree in science and moved in with our mother. Theo was born 15 days before my first birthday, making her my Irish twin. But we were as opposite as two sisters could be. I have light skin, she was dark. My hair is red, hers was black. I tend to be determined, proactive, and more prone to push my way through the world. She seemed to think that life just happened to her and was constantly perplexed over whether or not she could control anything. She was only supposed to stay in our childhood home temporarily, but Theo, perhaps because she was a daily witness to our mother's aging, came to feel she could never leave. She took a job as a student services coordinator at the local community college, and as arthritis and various health issues affected our mother's physique and mobility, Theo acquired the role of caregiver. My sister also loved to cook, and her weight ballooned to well over 200 pounds while she lived with and maintained our mother. I'm not privy to how Theo lived her life or how these things came to happen to her, but for the purposes of my story, you need to know this. My sister had bariatric surgery in 2004, and she lost a lot of weight. In photos from our 2005 family reunion, she smiles and looks healthy. In March 2011, I visited and was shocked to find Theo bloated and unwell. I begged her to fight for her life as she made comments about seeing our ancestors in her dreams and how we should get pink carnations for her funeral. But at the same time, she made me believe she would try to get better, and we began an ongoing communication that made it seem like she was doing so. Theo arranged visits with her doctors and would call me late at night to talk about her treatment. She said she needed surgery for scar tissue in her abdomen and the book about caregiving that she wanted to write someday. As much as I cherish the memory of these calls, I'm not sure she'd been telling me the whole truth. I think she was far sicker for far longer than she let on to any of us. That June, she checked into a hospital and was diagnosed with a severe pancreatic infection. She died within days. The morning we got the call that Theo had passed away, my husband asked me, "What's going to happen when your mother finds out?" I shook my head. "She'll only want to know who's going to take care of her now." "Really? But her daughter is dead and they lived together for years." "Yes, but that's just how my mom's brain works." As much as I've known who and what she is, a part of me thinks my mother is a sly child sitting in the back of the school bus, watching the bus driver's rearview mirror so she can jump up and down or move seats when she knows the driver isn't watching. Such a child knows better. I've often wondered if my mother does too and makes a conscious decision not to be an adult. I want her to be an adult. I wanted her to be the mother my sister sorely needed. A few days before Theo's funeral, I visited my mother in the little house Theo had bought for them just a couple of years earlier. The home sat a block from Lakeview Park on a street whose walker, wheelchair-friendly sidewalks led to the beach. Theo did the landscaping herself, and instead of mulch, she had put down sparkling pink stone gravel in the beds around her flowers. My mother sat watching Family Feud in the massage recliner Theo had procured for her with Medicaid funding. Her walker was positioned nearby. I saw the newspaper. "Mom, isn't that the paper with Theo's obituary?" She nodded as I picked it up and folded the pages open to the photo of my sister's face. her curly dark hair shining, her bright smile glowing. I placed the paper on the table so my mother could see it. A few minutes later, she turned it over and covered it with a department store circular. Whatever forgiveness I had managed from my mother, and I like to think I had scraped together a little about the way we were brought up, about her inability to fight for us or protect us, all came undone with Theo's death. I believed the same void into which I had thrown a multitude of gifts had at last taken a significant one. It swallowed Theo whole. I still wrestle shamefully with resentment for my mother because of this. For all my father's violence and bombast, I know he would have been devastated at the death of one of his children. He would have cried, and I had seen my father cry. He would have sat on the side of his bed and not come out for hours, as he had done when his fraternal twin Virgil died when I was 8. Then there was the time when one of my younger sisters was sick, and my mother had been slow to take her temperature. My father came home from work, and we all went to the emergency room where we found out that my sister had a dangerously high fever. I remember how mad he was at my mother, saying, "You could have messed around here and lost that child." I used to wonder what that meant. Lose how? And why was he so worried about it? I thought of this again when Theo died. We'd lost that child. But my mother, no matter how much she may have really felt the loss, could never make it seem like she cared. One day, in an Upper East Side thrift store, I slipped on a long silver gray fox that was perfectly too large in all the right places. I cupped the price tag hanging from the right cuff in both hands. $75, it read. I thought my heart would split with glee as I stood in front of a full-length mirror, examining the fur from all sides. I appreciated the coat's lightness and warmth. I could never wear such a thing, but then in that moment, I wasn't myself. I was Annie Pearl and Louise Jefferson both at the same time. I remember the excitement of getting a shipping box big enough to fit the coat. As I packed the fur carefully in a garment bag surrounded by tissue paper, I kept picturing Annie Pearl opening the box, imagining how ecstatic she would be to see the coat. It didn't even matter to me that I wouldn't be there to witness it myself. After I mailed the coat, I half expected my mother, when she saw Annie Pearl's fur, to request one for her, but instead she crocheted a gray beret for Annie Pearl to match the coat. My older brother saw the debut of this finery when Annie Pearl wore the fur. "You should have seen her strutting down that aisle," he said, but I didn't need to. I already felt complete. Now Annie Pearl is long gone. My mother at the time of this writing is 81 years old. As I sit here, there is a voicemail from her on my cell phone that has gone unanswered for 2 days. I wait and think, and I wonder, will I have any regret about the calls unreturned, the photos unsent, when my mother passes on? And I'm going to end there, and you'll have to read the second piece because
Oh
I've
my
gone on too long.
God.
You'll have to read the
Beautiful.
second piece.
So beautiful. Wow. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Wow.
Wow.